Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Lab 207 webcast. My name is Mr. Kite. I will be hanging out with you today as we continue on in our very long series about the origins of life. Topic for the day is going to be how to construct a phylogenetic tree. So, as always, let me get you your objectives and we'll get going. By the end of today's video, you should be able to do the following. First of all, just understand the concept of cladistics. What is it? Explain how you construct a phylogenetic tree. And finally, describe the use of phylogenetic trees as a hypothesis or as hypotheses. So in our last video, we talked about phylogenetic trees, basically what they were about. Today we're going to talk about how to actually make one. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview. We'll do more application in class. But before we get into that, first thing you need to understand is the idea of cladistics. Yesterday we talked about Linnaeus and his hierarchical taxonomy system of grouping organisms based on similarities, their homologous features. When we are working with cladistics, you are doing all of your grouping based on common ancestry. So two organisms may be grouped together not based on, similar structures they may have, but grouped based on their evolutionary history. They would be together if they came from the same common ancestor. So just kind of make that mental shift that when we're working with cladistics and making cladograms and phylogenetic trees, we are in the realm of working based on common ancestry, not necessarily homology, though homology usually infers or helps us to infer what common ancestry may have been. Now, before I talk to you a little bit about how to actually construct a tree, there are two terms that you need to be aware of. There are many types of shared characteristics that scientists use when they make cladograms of phylogenetic trees, but you need to understand the difference between a shared ancestral characteristic and a derived characteristic. Shared ancestral characteristics are characteristics that are present in an ancestral species. So an example of this, we're going to talk about mammals. A shared ancestral characteristic would be the backbone. There are many organisms that have got backbones. Mammals are not the only organisms that have backbones or a vertebral column. You could say mammals have got vertebral columns, but you could also say that fish do, you could say that reptiles do, you could say that birds do. So a shared ancestral characteristic would be the backbone, because that is common to all those groups of organisms, all the way back to saying that they probably shared a common ancestor that had the first backbone. A derived characteristic would be a feature that is unique to that group of organisms. So for mammals, a derived characteristic would be fur. Though they share a backbone with all of those groups of organisms, mammals are the only organisms that have fur. So fur would be a derived characteristic. That would be a characteristic that is unique to that group. A couple of terms that you need to be aware of. First one is shared derived character. That's the one I just talked about. The example was fur. It's a character that is unique to a specific clade. Just know a clade is a group of similar organisms. Then, for the purpose of constructing a tree, you need to know the term outgroup. An outgroup is an organism known to have diverged from the lineage before the organisms being studied. This is your basis for comparison. You could call it your control group. It is kind of our setup standard that we are going to compare against. And then the in-group is a group of the organisms that you are actually studying. So let's talk about how to construct a tree. When putting together a cladogram or a phylogenetic tree, it is usually done based on shared characteristics. So let me call up my pen here. A couple of things to recognize. Here are your organisms that are being compared, right here. Here are specific characteristics. And we are going to use these characteristics to try to put together a history of the evolution of these groups of animals. Now you can see our lamprey right here. It's got zeros all the way across. So 1 means that the characteristic is present in that group of organisms. 0 means that it is not. So lamprey, you can see that it does not have any of the characteristics that we are studying. So this means that the lamprey is our out group. It is all the way down here as our most primitive organism. And then what we do is we go along and essentially we make a branch point for each new characteristic that shows up and is common to all these animals. So as a new characteristic shows up, it would be a derived character, something new coming on the scene. So as we go from our lamprey, which doesn't have any of these characteristics, Our first characteristic we see here is jaws, which you see right here. Jaws represents our first branch point, and a jaw is going to be common to all of these organisms, but the shark is the first one to show it, and since the shark doesn't have any of the other characteristics we're looking for, we know that the shark is the next oldest organism. Continuing on, our next derived character we see is the lung. So as we go along, the lung represents our next branch point. Sharks don't have lungs, so they are off of this branch of the tree. All of these organisms would show lungs. Continuing on, next one is the amniotic membrane, which we first see in lizards. So we have passed the salamander, we're into lizards. All of these would have an amniotic membrane. Next up you have hair, so we've moved into the mammals, which is seen in the tiger, the gorilla, and the human. Next up we have got no tail, gorilla and human. Finally, bipedal, walking on two legs, is just human. So the way that they are putting this together is they're inferring evolutionary history from lamprey all the way to the human, using derived characters, new characteristics that show up that are unique to a group. As we were talking about trees yesterday, your last common ancestor of all of these organisms would be around here somewhere, or maybe even down here at the bottom of the tree before the branch point. So this would be the last common ancestor down here, and then as you go along, new characteristics represent a new branch in the tree. Two final slides for you. Obviously, with these organisms, there are a ton of different ways that you can construct a tree. If you're comparing three different organisms, there are three different possible phylogenetic trees or cladograms, and that number increases exponentially as you have more and more animals that you're comparing. So there's this idea called Occam's razor. Occam's razor essentially says that the simplest explanation is probably the correct explanation. As you're putting together trees, the tree that represents the fewest evolutionary changes, that offers the simplest course, is most likely to be the right tree. So kind of keep that in mind going forward. And finally, we've got this idea of phylogenetic trees as hypotheses. Now, obviously, we can't always roll back the clock to figure out what is the exact evolutionary history of an organism. So what scientists will do is they will construct what they think might be the phylogenetic tree of an organism, and then as they gather evidence, that evidence can be used to either support or refute the hypothesis they put forward in the tree that they constructed. So it's possible that as fossils are found, a phylogenetic tree for an organism might need to be altered or changed or whatever. But for the most part, well, not for the most part, just kind of recognize that these trees are hypotheses that can be changed or supported. I hope that gave you a little clue into at least the idea of putting together a phylogenetic tree. Like I said, we're going to do a lot of practice in class. If you are joining us online, just Google phylogenetic tree construction. You'll find a bunch of practice problems that you can work on. Thanks for joining us on the Lab 207 webcast. My name is Mr. Kite, and hopefully we'll see you again.